morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Adetunji, for being prompt and on time, and to every other person that has even come in before 10 minutes after. Thank you so much. So yes, I am Sarah Wichi, and I'll be facilitating today's session, adapting training delivery to diverse learners. And the reason I felt like, okay, we should do this is because in my experience within the learning industry, I've come to interact with different forms of learning interventions. Aside what Debawali had mentioned, I started off my career within the regular schooling system, and before moving into, e-learning and other learning interventions, basically. And I've come to interact with different forms of learning. And on this basis, I will be sharing my knowledge on this topic. Before some persons joined, we were speaking to, I think, the first and second person to join, and we were saying this particular thing is not really given much consideration in our climb, and that's because we feel it's just a nice to have. However, in recent times, we've seen that it's become a must to have, and that's why we're having this conversation. So it's going to be more of an expository session where the aim would be to just inform and explain some key consideration within the scope of the topic. Everyone is still on that lifelong learning journey on accessibility, inclusion, and interaction with diverse learners. And for me, it's also something that it's still a learning journey. And that's because when we design with awareness of the diversity of our learners in mind, we improve the learning experience for all. So sometimes it's not about where you are currently, it's about the person that would interact with what you've created, maybe 2, 3, or 5 to 10 years from now. With that material still be sufficient to meet the need of that environment. So we'll just get right into it. Okay. All right, so basically, what's our objective for today? It's on the screen. I'll be providing actionable strategies for adapting training to diverse learners within different contexts, be it in the classroom or online. And in more granular terms, I will try to, explain the different forms of learner diversity that we have. We'll try to recollect amongst ourselves some best practices for designing and delivering training to diverse learners. And that's because I say the word recall because these are some things that we are aware about, but we just don't practice. So it's going to be more of a refresher to some of us on this call. Then also we will discuss how technology can be used to enhance learning for diverse learners. And we'll try to identify different things that contribute to accessible and inclusive training environments. Then we'll have a Q&A for you to ask questions if, one comes up. So that's basically our journey for today. Okay, so we'll start off with definition of some key concepts. And that's because we live, teach, and learn in a multicultural world with people with varying backgrounds. And as such, it's important to understand how diversity applies within the learning environment. I believe that a good portion of us on this call are in the learning and development field. So how does diversity, how does it impact learners' success? So let's start off with defining some key concepts just so we are familiar in case, some sounds new to some of us on this call. So we'll start off with diversity, and I have some definitions according to some recognized bodies on the screen. So for diversity, according to the Society of Human Resource Management, says diversity is the collective mixture of differences and similarities that includes, for example, individual and organizational characteristics, values, beliefs, experiences, backgrounds, preferences, and behavior. So basically, diversity, according to them, is any dimension, any factor, any consideration that can be used to differentiate groups of people from another. It's more about looking closely and recognizing what makes people different. So in terms of their age, their gender, religion, disability, sexual orientation, as we have in recent times, education, also their national origin. So it's really a broad spectrum of factors, basically, that you can use to identify how diverse a group is. And when it comes to the learning environment, we understand that the fact that you have people with different age in the room, the fact that you have people from different nationalities in the room, already bring different perspectives into your space. And there is also the religious, there's also the cultural differences. So the power of diversity basically is that you recognize these differences in learning, and you respect them and value them in each person, and you treat each person as, this is you, this is what you stand for, this is it's complete. You are not less of a person than the other person, despite the fact that you are from different areas, basically. So that's what diversity says. Inclusion, according to the global diversity practice, is practices in which different people have different backgrounds, but they are culturally and socially accepted and welcomed and treated equally. So what's it called? Diversity is more about saying you recognize the differences. You can see that in this room, we have a mix. Everyone is not the same. And inclusion is saying that you accept it and you appreciate it. Everyone feels the same level of respect, of being seen, basically. And so as I've mentioned earlier, these things vary. Religion, gender, status, even goes down to personality, basically. You recognize the introverts in the room, you recognize the extroverts in the room, and you don't treat one as better than the other. You give everyone the space to flourish. So that's what inclusion is, basically. Then we move on to accessibility. So according to the W3C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium, according to their Web Accessibility Initiative, accessibility to them refers to means that websites, tools, technologies are designed and developed so that people with disability can use them. So according to them, they say that accessibility is an attribute that makes an experience available to all. It's about access. So I can use this thing as much as somebody else can use it, irrespective of my age, irrespective of a physical or non-physical shortcoming that I may have, basically. And it's about ensuring that people experiencing disabilities are able to use your learning product or your learning service with as much ease as someone else. So to be more specific, in our world of learning, accessibility is more about implementing educational interventions or initiatives in a way that ensures that the experience and learning content are usable and within reach to all learners, regardless of their abilities and disabilities, or even regardless of their technological shortcomings or difficulties, basically. So we move to the last, which is equity. We all know that story between equity and equality, basically. But according to the National Association for Colleges and Employers, which is an American nonprofit, by the way, that has been in existence since 1956, they say that equity is recognizing that we do not all start from the same place and must acknowledge that and make adjustments to imbalances. So for me, equity simply is more like fairness, being fair and being just in a particular situation. We know that this is different, obviously, from equality, which is like providing the same thing to all. But equity is like providing each person what they need to be on the same level. So these are all concepts that they are very important for us to be aware of when we are talking about diversity of learners, diversity of instructions, and just trying to meet everyone at the point of their need. And when these concepts when they are put together, they are called the DEIA because they all work, and you can't be inclusive and not accessible. You can't say that you are attending to diverse needs or taking key consideration of diversity, and there's no element of equity in what you do. Every one of them works hand in hand, basically. So why is it important for us to be having this discussion today? Why are we talking about this? Why was this topic even put into the curriculum for our webinars? And what are we doing here on a Saturday that we should be at and one day? So this concept, the acronym basically represents a comprehensive approach to an environment, either in the workplace or in a learning environment that is safe, fair, respectful, and inclusive of all individuals. So you may wonder that why are we having this conversation when for you all you do is just create slides and you just teach. But the truth is that paying attention to these concepts, they help you to achieve positive results. They help you to teach something new. They help you to make people do better on the job. And they also help you to meet your training goals for the year. For those on this call, mine is just to complete my training goals for the year. Those, should I say, L&D professionals that feel it's just about the numbers. So this discussion is even for you if you are all about the numbers, if your clients are all about the numbers. Still being aware of DEIA makes your work easier. And I'll just speak to different things, different benefits, basically, why this discussion is important. So the first one is ensuring equal opportunities. I don't think I need to say more here because I've spoken about it when talking about equity. So basically, we provide an experience where no one feels left out or sidelined. The idea is that if you claim to be a learning professional, if you claim to be someone passionate about lifelong learning, and you claim to be someone passionate about the impact of what you do on people, then it's really important that you create equal opportunities for everyone. Someone should not experience your program and say, oh, it was good, but I should have. Everyone should be able to say the same thing, the same experience. They should be able to narrate, their experience, at least to some extent, have the same experience. So when it comes to the second importance, which is the ethical and legal responsibility, for some, this is like the number one importance. In some countries, this would have been like the first important reason for having this conversation. And that's because in recent years, some countries and governments have taken the issue of inclusion and diversity very, very seriously. It's become like a social responsibility for private and public institutions, such that even the violation of it is more like it's seen as a violation of human rights. In the US, this is really a big deal. And it's even punishable by the law if you violate the rights of an human in terms of accessibility and inclusion. Now you might say, oh, I'm not in the US, I'm in Nigeria, I've been creating content for the past 25 years in Nigeria, why do I need this? The point is, there comes a time where you might need to interact with these people. We all want to be global L&D practitioners. So it's important that we are aware. It's really, really important that we are aware. Your audience might change at a particular time. Not the total package, but you can, for example, have a particular project where you are interacting or collaborating with a partner organization that pays attention to these things. So you don't want to be caught unaware. You don't want to be the learner on the field and you don't understand the concepts, you don't understand what to do or steps to take, basically. So it's really a big deal, and that's why we're having this conversation. So the next is in terms of expanding reach and impact. So this applies to you as an individual or as a training organization or simply just someone that's, wants to share knowledge basically. The goal is always to reach more people and solve more problems and making the world a better place. So you need to understand that this material, if I want it to get to more, and I mentioned when I started saying, whatever you create today could be for 10 learners, but that material can be useful in 3-5 years, that it will now become something adaptable to people in a particular community or in a particular region. So what are you doing today? Looking beyond those 5 learners that you have on ground, what are you doing today to make sure that that material reach more people and have more impact, in coming years, basically. So with this knowledge, we're able to reach more people, we're able to do more. Next is fostering innovation. And as the slide, let me see. So yeah, just trying to share my network. Okay, so yes, next is fostering innovation. And as the slide says, we become better at embracing diverse perspectives, fostering innovation, creativity, and problem solving. So when you pay attention to these things, you don't stay the regular L&D champion, like the local champion, basically. It makes you want to do more. Every time you have a project, you are thinking of that new thing you've learned within the context of diversity and inclusion and how you can apply it, on the job. You are being more creative. You are saying that, oh, this material can it reach more people? How can more people benefit from it? How can it be so engaging that I even increase the completion rate? Because trust me, sometimes even completion rate is an issue of you not meeting some of these things, because you say, for example, you have a learner with a particular need and that person is not being satisfied with the learning experience. That's one completion rate down the drain. So it really helps you to foster innovation. The next is positive reputation. So as L&D professionals, this knowledge sets you apart from others, basically, and gives you an edge. I know that there are certifications within the framework of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. There are several certifications that even some organizations ask for. But at this point, we are not even talking about the certification. We are just talking about the knowledge, the awareness that this thing exists and this thing, some persons pay attention to it. So you are able to build more. It's more like building your brand, and you are seen as someone that pays attention to this. And you can't say that, we shouldn't say rather that we are, learning and development professionals and we are only fixed on people that are in what's the word now? People that are without needs. We feel like, oh, let's just create this slide to the best of our ability, to our likeness, and learners will sort their way around it. They will find it interesting. So having this knowledge helps you to build a positive reputation within the industry and also building your brand as well. Then lastly, it's a mental health thing, basically. And I think it's for some of us. For me, it's a mental health thing. And that's because my audience, this is a very important issue within my current role where I work. It's very important that you don't just create learning materials and then you go to sleep. By the time you're sleeping, you're thinking, oh, did I enable caption on this thing? Did I do this? Oh, hope the color was not so busy and all of that. You are lost in thoughts because we have a very wide audience that interacts with our materials. We have different age range. Our content speaks to different African countries. So there is that need to make sure that you are reaching the satisfaction level for at least a good number of persons. So for me, I just have to put this because it speaks to me and I hope it speaks to some of you. It helps you to have that, that peace of mind and that awareness that you are doing something right, you are contributing to a good cause. And in other words, you get to sleep well at night. So yes, let's So let's move. We've tried to talk about key concepts within this topic, and we've also tried to establish why we are having this conversation, why it is important. So we would move on to understanding learner diversity. And really, there's really no one size fits all definition when it comes to diversity. What we can do is, and that's because there's even no one size fits all approach to learning or facilitation or teaching. These are subject areas that, it's the situation sometimes mostly define how it is perceived. So, but what we can do is have like an umbrella, group these definitions under some particular areas. So which is what we are going to be doing. So we are going to try to look at learner diversity in terms of cognitive diversity, in terms of cultural diversity, and also in terms of access diversity. So when we look at when we try to understand what we mean by learner diversity, looking from the cognitive spectrum, it's more about looking at the differences in the way people think and solve problems, variations in cognitive abilities, their memory, attention span, processing speed. And if you notice, I didn't mention learning styles. I'm sure some of you, while I was speaking, might think of the differences in the way people think and learn. I have come to join the, should I say, bandwagon of the arguments on the efficacy of learning styles. I believe that a 20th century L&D professional should know what is currently the controversy on that subject, and you should pick a stand. So I wouldn't come to enforce my stand on everyone, but my own stand is that there's really no evidence accommodating learning styles. While we know that there are different ways that things can be processed, it really doesn't make sense to say, oh, I am made this, and does that mean that other materials you can interact with? Someone I know always starts by saying, how did you learn your national anthem as a child? Even when they were teaching you with pictures, teaching you the alphabet with pictures, how did you learn the national anthem? No one drew it out for you, no one wrote it out for you. You learned it because you heard some people singing it. And you learn what an apple is by constantly seeing the pictures from, picture books and all of that. So they all work hand in hand. And when we establish our basis for creating a learning material, we're saying, oh, we're trying to meet different learning styles. It really limits us at the end of the day. Basically, it limits us. So for me, I try to remove that from my vocabulary so that I'm able to do more effective work. But I really urge everyone on this call to try to read more on those controversies, so we are not just always saying, oh, learning according to learning styles and how people learn. Some people are visual learners and all of that. I think we should do our background check. And that's because, so it's also not to say that it wasn't valid at some point, but we know that things change. We know that research, more research are done, and whatever knowledge we have are being improved upon. So let's try to update our knowledge, basically, and know what's the current research and findings on that topic, learning styles, is. So yes, I wouldn't want to dwell on that further. So we'll look at cultural diversity. So cultural diversity speaks to, as it says, cultural, so different cultural backgrounds, different traditions, languages, and values, different mindsets. In some places, what you count as respect is not what is counted as or seen as respect in other climes. So understanding this and understanding it when you have a room filled with different people is something that is very, very important when you're trying to initiate a learning experience. Then access needs. So there's also learner diversity in terms of access. And this basically includes ensuring that learning for individuals with disabilities is done well, ensuring that you are aware that there are people with different physical disabilities or sensory impairments, and trying to make sure that your materials or your methods or the experience you're trying to create meets everyone, at least to some extent. Because these things really, it's not a, like I said at the beginning, not a one size fits all. You might definitely meet some person's needs more than some, but being able to at least create a benchmark where there is a level of satisfaction that cuts across board for everyone interacting with your learning experience. And when we still talk about access diversity, I know some of you would think of disabilities. So when you think about disabilities, let me see in the chat, what comes to mind when you think of disabilities? What comes to mind when you think about disabilities? Because of time. So when it comes to disability, people really think more about the physical disabilities. But I'm going to share some interesting facts with you from the United Nations, and we're going to try to think really about this and probably change, thank you, Chubi, and probably change our mindset about it. So yes, here are some very interesting disability facts from the United Nations. And I'll try to read it as well. So fact 1 says that 1 in 5 people in the world have a disability. So let me shake some tables here. So it means in this room we are more than 5. So there is that possibility that there is someone on this call with a disability. Now you might know and you might not know. In fact, me, I also facilitating, I might be on this table and not aware. And that's because we often think, oh, disability is something physical that, everyone can see. But there are actually lots of disabilities that are not so physical. They are not even probably life-threatening, but they are something that should be considered if you want me to enjoy whatever you are delivering to me. So that's point 1 is very interesting for me. Like the fact that 1 in 5 people have a disability. Point 2 says, obviously, based on point 1, 80% of disabilities are hidden. They are hidden, meaning the ones we see, they are like the tiniest part of the whole spectrum, really. Point 3 says that only 17% of people with disability are born with a disability, meaning some come up at a particular point in life. Just 17% are actually born with it. 2% of the working population becomes disabled every year. So as at today, I might be fine, but by next year, something might happen that would affect the way I interact with a learning experience. So because you know what happens to the working population. So 2% of the working population becomes disabled every year. That will be point 5 says, in countries where life expectancy is over 70 years, individuals spend an average of 8 years of their life living with a disability. And point 5 says, 1 in 4 people will be affected by mental health in the course of their lifetime. So what does this say basically? That it's not only about the physical things that you can see. There is more to it. Everyone can come to your training, classroom or online, looking prim and proper, but there might be a shortcoming somewhere. So how do you look out for these things? How do you make sure that you take care of this to the best of your ability? So based on these points that I've given, I would like us to engage in a certain activity based on the fact that I've established that disability is not only in terms of the physical. There are a lot, 80% according to UN, that is hidden. So let's look at visual. Let's start with visual disabilities. I would mention one, and I would want you to mention something else in the chat box that you think is a disability under this umbrella. So in terms of visual disability, everyone thinks about um, learners with low vision or someone that is blind. So you think, oh, I don't have a blind person on my list, so I don't have a problem. So I don't need to think about anything when it comes to visual disability. So trying to make sure that my material or my learning experience solves a particular visual disability. There are other categories of visual disability aside low vision and blindness. So I'm hoping someone can, mention something in the chat. Thank you very much. So that's even more of like that's glaucoma is more of like a medical condition. So let's look at someone that does not have a medical condition. How can a person, part-time, because there's also that part of the fact that said that disability can happen, 2% of working population experience disability every year. So what can happen to someone that is okay with their sight, and then thank you, short-sightedness, long-sightedness, and the likes? But do you know that I don't have short-sightedness, I don't have long-sightedness, but in the course of this training, for example, just imagine this, so I'm in a room where I have to like turn off some of the lights just to be comfortable. Because if I had all the lights on, I wouldn't be comfortable and I would probably be distracted. So you won't see that as quote unquote a disability, but it is. So when we try to create, we're having, for example, a live session, or if a session in a physical location, and we want all the lights, camera action, different colors popping here and there's so many lights in the room. You think, oh, it's nice, it looks nice, everyone can see themselves, the room looks pretty. But there are some persons in that room that they are not blind, they don't have low vision, they don't have short-sightedness, they don't have long-sightedness. But at that moment, they are experiencing discomfort, and they probably would not interact with your learning material as they should. So do we agree? I would want to see feedback in the chat. Do we agree that disability can be seen from that light? Absolutely. Thank you. And if you do not agree also, you can also state your case in the chat. When we look at physical disability, we say learners with wheelchair. So we are like, oh, there's nobody on wheelchair on this list. So I'm good to go. That venue, we can use that venue with 1,000 stairs. There is no learner with disability. Everyone would walk. But do you know that that room that you decided to use, where they are going to take 1,000 steps to your venue, can be a disability to someone, can affect somebody's learning experience when they get into the room? You can have somebody that's probably, has issues with walking. The person is physically, or you can't see any disability, but after 5 stairs, the person is panting. Down exactly, 1,000 stairs would even affect everyone. But let's just paint a case. You think that, oh, they are youths, and this training is for teenagers, so they are fine, they should be fine. And then you set your class on the mountain and you expect everyone to climb successfully. You know that you can lose their concentration in the first 20 minutes because they are still trying to recover. So that's something also. We are looking at auditory disability now. We think of people with hearing impairments. So we are like, oh, our training is not, we don't have any deaf person on this training. So we are good to go. But I could be, somebody on this call could be attending this class, for example, or taking maybe your e-learning course, like a self-paced course. You think, oh, everybody attends self-paced materials in the comfort of their room. I could be in a very noisy environment and I just want to complete my courses for the day. But I can't listen, I can't hear anything because where I am is noisy. But if there was captioning, I would probably be able to read it and complete my learning. But you feel, no, they don't need this now. There's no learner that is registered as a person with hearing impairment. So I don't need to put some capturing or transcript even in my e-learning products. So those are the assumptions we make, and we think we are good to go, and we create things that are probably substandard, because even those that you think they are without disability that you are catering to, there can actually be some disability at some point where they're interacting with what you are doing. So that's why it's really important that we are paying attention to a lot of things. Let's go to cognitive, neuro, logical, and speech. Like, they are all the same. We look at the worst case scenarios, but at the end of the day, there are some subtle scenarios where you need to pay attention to as a learning professional. The whole idea is that you take every box tickable. You look at every worst case scenario when you are providing a learning experience. So we'll move on because of time. So moving on, we can't, apologies. We can't talk about web accessibility, diversity without talking about the web. And that's because in recent times, things have, really changed. For me, I started this journey of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility when I got to my most recent organization. And that's because I had to look at the objective and the nature of our programs. I work with a non-profit that is Pan-African, meaning we cater to different needs. There is this advocacy for persons with disability. We always look out for PWDs in our programs. We cater to Nigerians, Kenyans, South Africans, so different people. We cater to different age range. We have programs for teenagers, we have programs for undergraduates, we have programs for change makers, social innovators. So we are not just creating learning experience for the same set of people over and over. There has to be that need to be aware of what is going on. And that's why I said earlier that awareness is important. So for me, I started off my knowledge. I started, enriching myself about this knowledge with a free edX course, Introduction to Web Accessibility by W3C. And when you take that course, I think your first experience, like the first two modules, you would really feel you would understand that as a learning professional, there's so much to be done. There's so much to do. You will understand that it's not just a surface level career path. It's more like a call of duty. Like, you don't just think everything you do is limited to your training room. You try to do more for people. And seeing how people with disability try to access the web, because now everybody is saying, oh, let's create materials online, let's put it online, our learners will be online. And we are not paying attention to how to make this experience comfortable for people. But when you take this course, you would see how they try to navigate whatever you've provided, the number of assistive technologies that are out there, and you begin to question if you're really doing enough and you just want to improve. So it's something that I would really encourage, people to check out. Thank you so much, Debo. So moving on, a common question is when people ask us, oh, how do I comply with web accessibility accessibility standard. Apologies, I need to get some water. Thank you. So people say, oh, where do I start from? I already told you a course you can start with. But there are different standards. There are different things when it comes to web accessibility. There are different standards out there that you can try to, enrich yourself about. And so currently we have three that are really prominent. We have the ADA, which is the American Disability Act. And don't say, oh, I'm Nigerian, doesn't concern me. Basically, we as Nigerians, we don't really have our own rules about these things. So we really need to adopt those that are ahead of us and see how we can also implement it. I know in our context too, there are advocacies that are like coming up. The persons with disabilities already have like a group. They have a platform where they try to advocate for better educative initiatives for themselves and all of that. But those that are like widely recognized, we have the ADA, we have the Section 508, which is the United States law, and we have the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is the WCAG. And so I'll just try to speak to each of them briefly. So for the ADA, which is the American Disability Act, and the Section 508, they really go hand in hand, and there are laws that requires that federal agencies and some federal contractors make their websites or their learning platform, any online material accessible. And the WCAG is basically guidelines for web accessibility. So sometimes there is need to be compliance with these things. If you work with organizations where they want to be ADA compliance, then you really need to know what it's all about. If you work with an organization where they want to be WCAG compliance, you really need to know what it's all about. But for the sake of this session, we'll talk about the WCAG. And basically, it refers to a set of standards for web accessibility. There are guidelines that are designed for all kinds of people, including people with disability. And it ranges from auditory, visual, speech, all the disabilities we had mentioned earlier. And it's very important that we try to follow it. So it's really crucial that as learning professionals or maybe even e-learning developers, if we have some on the call, that we design products that can be experienced by all individuals. So the goal is that there's collaboration amongst everybody. A lot of people have to come together to put out this guideline for the web. So basically, it contains technical specifications, it contains guidelines and techniques that support resources and try to describe accessibility solutions when you're trying to work on a material for the web. So depending on the organization, there are different legal requirements for your organization. Like I said earlier, if your organization is web ADA compliance, you need to make sure you're following the rules and all of that. So when it comes to the web content accessibility guideline, it also has its own levels and standard. We had the standard 1.0, and currently we are on the standard 2.1. And each standard has levels. So there's level A, there is level double A, and there's level triple A. And level A is more like must do guidelines. So the reason I'm going into all this is to say, even if you're in Nigeria, if you're in, a context where you don't really need to be compliant with these rules. You don't have the government on your neck when it comes to accessibility and inclusion. You should still do your part to contribute to the global cause, basically. So level A means that it contains guidelines that are like must do for everybody. At least this is the basics. And level AA is more like should do. So if your learning materials already, include things that are on the A level, you can decide to scale upwards and, attain more expertise when it comes to accessibility. Now level triple A is like you are on top of the world and you have the most perfect learning experience on the web for your users. So I really encourage us to try to download the guideline and look through it. I like the fact that it has boxes that you can tick. So when you're creating something, you can, tick to identify the ones you are complying to. And also, just from the top of my head now, I think it's even important to be able to speak this language, because when you're talking to some clients, instead of you just saying, when you're trying to make a case for yourself and you say, oh, we want this material to have transcripts, to have downloadable audio, to have closed caption and all of that, and they're like, it's a waste. But when you bring out your case from this, these are global requirements. This is something that sets us apart. So this is something that is actually a must do when it comes to the rights of humans. It's also a case that you can make to your clients when you are trying to advocate for these things. So you can show them the document to say, these are the things we are trying to reach. This is what we are trying to do as an organization. So for us at my organization, we try to pride ourselves as in the fact that we are actively working to improve our learning experiences to make sure that we are meeting the needs of persons with disability. So just something to put out there that you can also, use as well. So I'll just speak briefly also about the guideline. So there are like 4 principles upon which everything under the WCAG guideline is built. And you can always remember it with 4 letters, which form the acronym PAW. And one is perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And these are actually according to Web3C's definition. So for perceivable, it says that the information must be presented in a way that everyone can perceive and understand the information. It can't be invisible to all their senses. So whatever you are creating must interact with every sense possible. It must be designed in a way that, okay, I can hear at the same time, I can read, I can interact. So if I feel like hearing is distracting, I can put it off and read. If I feel like listening and trying to read is distracting, I can remove the closed caption and listen attentively and all of that. So it says that nothing should be invisible to all the senses of a person. Operable says that people should be able to navigate whatever you are doing. It could be a classroom, it could be an online experience. People should be able to navigate. You don't want to set your training all in a way that people can't confidently get up to use the restroom, or they have to climb, like I said earlier, the mountain to get to where your training is happening, or they have to struggle with whatever setup that you have put, and you set up the class in a way that they can't see you. You are facing some, you are backing some, and all of that. And when it comes to the online space, it should be navigable. So you see that I'm trying to use it both in the classroom context and the online context. And that's because we always think that, oh, everything has to do with the web. But you can also apply this web context accessibility guideline. You can even use it as a framework, even within your classroom trainings and all of that. Then understandable. They should be able to understand, of course. Simple language, simple grammar, no need to show your expertise with the use of words. Communicating in the best way possible for everyone to understand. Accessible points and fonts, things that are readable, clear instructions, click here should be as simple as click here, not do you want to touch this button, touch it now. Something simple, you understand? So that's it basically in terms of being understandable. Then being robust just speaks to the fact that it can be interpreted in various ways using various assistive technologies if possible. I had mentioned before, it's not a nice to have to say your e-learning material as caption, as audio, as transcript, as subtitle. It is not a nice to have. For some persons or some programs, it's really, really important to put all those options there to make sure that if one doesn't work for one learner, another can work for him or her. So those are the principles basically. So in summary, we as learning designers, we shouldn't just, say, oh, I've adjusted the text, the contrast is fine, and the page layout is fine, and call it a day. That's the trap some of us fall in. And we feel like once we check the color contrast and elements, we are good to go. But really, there is more to accessibility, and it's important that we have a full grasp of the standards, of the guidelines, and see how we can explore them to create more useful materials. So we'll move on to another bit of activity. I would like to get everyone's attention here as well. And basically, we'll be sticking to best practices for designing training materials or delivering training to diverse learners. I'm sure that we've mentioned some of this in the course of our conversation. So, how do you start your journey of accessibility and inclusivity? If, for example, you are, paying attention to this for the first time, I've said the first step, read about the guidelines. Step 2, probably take a course, at least an introductory course to have an awareness of what's going on. For me, it's always with the word access. I try to ask myself that this thing I've created, who would not be able to use it? I don't start from who can use it. I start from who would not be able to. So I'm able to get that list and then try to, if this person would not be able to use it, then what's the solution? And include that solution. If this person is not going to be able to interact with it, what's the solution? And try to include it. So for me, it's always the question, who can't access it and why? And then I try to remove that barrier. And I am contributing to an accessible material, an accessible experience, basically. So as an e-learning professional, it's really important that we have that mindset, that accessibility first approach, not just looking at the first set of people in the room interacting with your product, looking beyond their physical. And so yes, it's not a question you ask at the testing phase of delivery. It's something you ask from the beginning of your program. It's something that you set up with a rich needs assessment. We don't just ask basic questions. You should have in your demography, you should have questions that makes the learner say things that would help you depict what an issue could be. So having a rich needs assessment is very important. Conducting surveys and assessments is really important for you to get a grasp and create something from the scratch that meets the needs of diverse learners. Looking at even the RD framework, for example, if we say, how can we incorporate accessibility into it? I've said the needs assessment, that's in trying to analyze what you're trying to do, identify the accessibility barriers that can come up. Then when you're designing, you design with the accessibility community in mind. That's if, whatever you are designing needs to speak to them. For us, sometimes we have to prepare these materials and send to them to experience first. Then we use their feedback to modify, because the material at that point might not be for maybe a community of PWDs, but on the long run, you want to create something that can stand the test of time. You want to create something that, or if this now becomes a case where we have a scenario, we don't need to go back to the drawing table and start afresh. You want to create something encompassing from the scratch. So it's not bad to design with the disability community in mind. Even in a classroom experience, it's not bad to engage somebody to say, oh, if you were to attend a training, what would you like to see? They will tell you a lot of things that you never even have thought of, the fact that those things can be a case where some persons are not even attending your conferences or your programs because they've looked at your venue online, they've seen the name, they're like, oh, that place, no, I can't even make it to the toilet, I can't even make it to the room, I'll need someone to carry me, I'll need this, I'll need that. That place is always with bright lights, they don't control the lights, the AC is terrible, they don't control the code and all of that. So you want to engage these people and hear from them, and you'd hear very, very interesting things that helps you to do better. So when you develop also, like I said, you share with this community, they interact with it, and then they give you feedback. And when you implement as well, you try to include people with disabilities in your program because you are catering to the needs of all. You claim to be a learning professional that caters to the needs of all. So really make sure that you are reaching all. And when you evaluate also, you pay attention to what they say. You don't just assume. You pay attention to what they say. You hear that feedback. In some cases, surveys might not be even sufficient. You might need to like engage with them in the room, sit with them and hear them, give you feedback. So that's it with like trying to use the ADE framework. Then looking at what we have on the screen, I think this just speaks to strategies that you can use both in physical location and in online settings. So I would also want you to interact here. Try to mention how you would apply these practices. If you have been applying them, let's try to educate each other. So how would you apply these practices either in the classroom or in an online learning experience? So the first is to encourage all students to participate. So how do you do that? If you've ever, tried to do that. Let's see. I'll be waiting for your feedback. So how do you try to encourage people to participate? Sometimes it seems like it is obvious, but sometimes people don't really pay attention to it, and it makes some people uncomfortable with your learning experience. So how do you allow people to participate? I'm waiting for at least one response or two. I know some persons are still writing. All participants to respond. Okay. Icebreakers. Thank you, Chinedu. Icebreakers allows everyone to participate. Questions and suggestions. Thank you, OLxD. Thank you. So yes, you depending on the nature of what you're doing, you can try to, thank you, Ayowale, making learning relatable. You can encourage participation by involving people, role play scenarios. Sometimes all might apply, sometimes some might apply, depending on your objective as well. I remember that when we had the OLxD hangouts, we had these amazing icebreakers that even the person that was quiet at the beginning of the whole experience, they were talking, they were interacting and all, because it was needed in that context. It was really important that every single person got to their feet, and we were able to achieve that. So in some cases also, depending on what you're teaching, role plays might be very effective, particularly when it's a topic that it's not new to the people, or it's even their life experience, something they are going through. So putting them in those scenarios, asking them how they acted or how they would have acted is really important. Think, pair, and share. Thank you so much, Olatunji. So yes, we see that there are different ways in which you can encourage people to participate, really. And second is to choose inclusive imagery and storytelling. So both in the classroom and in the online setting, it is really important that your imagery speaks to people. It's really important that your storytelling speaks to people. And how can you encourage this? I'll be looking out in the chat. How can you encourage this? I'll speak from my own point of view on my job. How do I do this? So because we deal with, I'm expecting your responses, but I'll speak while you write. So because we deal with different audience, even when we name characters, we are very particular about how we name characters. We can't say that a program is for youth in Africa and we only pick Nigerian names. That alone can upset a learner and they just drop off. And you are surprised. And when you get back to them and ask for feedback, and they're like, I never felt included. It's as much as even mixing your characters with someone slim, with someone a bit chubby, and all of that. Just creating something that people can relate to. Inclusive storytelling as well. Not only using context that they can't see themselves in. As much as you want to tell people what is happening in the global context, you should still be able to bring it down to home. And that's also it about inclusive storytelling. I'm hoping someone can write something on this, how they try to, what practice they use when it comes to inclusive imagery and storytelling. Okay, probably we don't have one, so we'll move to the next. Avoiding stereotypes and generalization. I think I've mentioned this before. You don't expect that everyone is the same. You don't speak like to everyone using the same example. You don't expect that people understand things the same way. Then also you should be careful of stereotypes. You should make sure that your language, your examples don't bring up controversies. You should be careful of, what, even as much as you want to use storytelling, what kind of stories do you tell? How do you try to create a balance so that nobody feels insulted, nobody feels better than the next learner? So that's it about avoiding stereotypes. So I would really like examples on some of these points. I'm really waiting for, so it could be anyone. I might not have gotten there, but you can share. It could be anyone. One thing about also avoiding stereotypes, for example, when it comes to inclusivity, for example, when you're trying to write inclusive content, I'm trying to remember how we say it. So when we refer to persons with disability, okay, yes, exactly. I think I even used it at this point. So we are quick to say the blind man or a blind person, a deaf person. But do you know that it's actually, should I say wrong, or it's more advisable to start off with focusing on their abilities, not their limitation. So the first ability is that individual is a person. So it's a person on wheelchair. It is a person with hearing impairment. It's a person with vision impairment, not blind man or deaf man. If you watch some interviews about these things, it's really been called out that we should be better in our writing when we are trying to address this persons with disability, not the disabled, for example. So you don't let that language portray that person lacks something. You don't make it the first thing that is seen about that individual. So you can even be using an example and you have persons with disability in the room and you're saying, oh, so that deaf man and that blind man, it's actually not the right choice of words to use. So that's like a stereotype that we need to like correct. I'm trying to see if anyone has written anything. I would have loved to wait on this call, but I'm really looking at the time. So the next thing is to create safe spaces within your learning communities. And this applies to some of us that do e-learning, or after a program, you create a WhatsApp group and you say you're encouraging interactions. You need to pay attention to those groups because it might not be safe for some persons. So are you setting ground rules for people's interactions? You can have a group that contains people from different cultures, different values and mindsets. Do you censor the language that is being used? So creating safe spaces within communities is really important. You don't just create a community and you leave them to speak. By the time you come back one day, hell might have broken loose because somebody has insulted somebody and drama has started. So there is need to pay attention to putting things in place to ensure that that community you are creating is healthy and safe. Then you give room for learners to share perspectives. We try to do that. Sometimes people interact, sometimes people don't, but you give room for that. Number 6, you use simple language. I've spoken about this before. Simple language is the best. The simplest way to describe something. There is always a simple way to describe something. So we stick to the simple. There is so much blessing in simplicity, as they say. Then last, you give room for feedback and you acknowledge it. So there are sometimes when we say any feedback, any suggestions, any recommendations, and someone gives you feedback based on, you asked and I'm giving it. But there's a way you respond to that feedback that might prevent that person giving a feedback next time. So we need to be aware as a learning professional, how you receive it, how you respond to it. Make sure you acknowledge it, make sure you note it. It might not sit well with you, but you asked for it, so you should be able to take it. So those are some best practices that you can use when you are interacting with diverse people. Your values might be different from theirs. So when you ask for feedback and they give it to you based on their own context, based on what they understand, at that point it's just right that you accept it and you acknowledge it. And yeah, so moving on to how you can leverage technology to also in this issue of reaching diverse learners. I think this I'll just speak to it briefly. So we have different learning systems in recent times. We have platforms. Ensure that your platform is interactive, platforms that can be adjusted by people if you have a diverse audience. Your virtual classroom also, if you have probably done your needs assessment and you've noticed some things, make sure that you leverage the assistive technologies on your virtual classrooms. Trust me, most of the softwares have assistive technologies and how you can incorporate it. Mobile learning also, ensure that training is accessible on different devices. At this point, I'll even speak to data, internet connectivity. You don't create things that for you are using your company data to download the video. A learner, probably an undergraduate or a teenager, to that person, 20 gig is a lot and they just can't deal. So can you make your content in a way that it is easy to download, it is easy to use and interact. It's not too heavy for someone with little means to interact with. Then your learning management systems as well. If you are using learning management systems here, for us, it's still an ongoing journey and you can join as well. These systems, they have interactive or they have some elements that helps you ensure that you are meeting the needs of diverse learners. So it's really good to explore what you have on these technologies you use. Our authoring tools to have amazing, things that you can do to make sure that people interact well. When we say that, even when you post maybe on social media, when we say that you should add the alt text to your picture, it's not just a nice to have. If you really claim that you want to reach more people, you should take the time to use the alt text. Because not everyone, trust me, there are lots of persons with disability on the web. And if you really want them to interact with your products, you really need to meet their needs, every single need, and make sure that everyone is getting the same experience. So if there is one thing you want to take away today, at least when you are posting on maybe LinkedIn, start adding alt text. I started doing it and it can be a lot, but you feel better. You know that you are doing something good and you know that you are improving as a learning professional. You are widening your reach basically. Then leveraging analytics tools also. These tools help you to interact with these persons and it's really good to leverage them when you are engaging with people with disability or just trying to meet the needs of more diverse persons. Remember, I've told you that it might not be a physical disability. Someone might be perfectly fine, but at that point in time, what you have presented could become something they can interact with if you don't make it easy to use as possible. So moving on, you might say that, oh, if I do all these things, how do I measure its impact? How do I report to my managers? What's the case for it? Like when I said, if you are trying to make a case and your managers are saying it's a nice to have, and you're trying to defend yourself based on the WCAG guidelines. These are ways that you can also use to measure impact. So first is defining your metrics. You set metrics when you've analyzed your needs assessment, when you've gotten an idea of the people in the room. Now, your metrics might be the engagement rates or knowledge retention. You pay attention to people that mentioned issues and you try to look out what the result is after they've experienced your learning intervention through their engagement rates, through retention of knowledge, through performance, improvements. And these metrics, you are able to use tools like feedback mechanisms to get responses on them, surveys, quizzes, and all of that. And these are not things you ask at the end of your program. These are not things, most of us, we just do baseline and endline evaluations. I've come to really understand that, particularly when your program is something with a long term, a long duration, midline evaluations should not be taken lightly. They are very important because they help you tweak whatever the learner would meet at the end of their journey. So these feedback instruments, they help you to gauge the acceptance of your solutions at different levels, and they allow you to make improvements. And then at the end, you make improvements. So you use all those data you've gotten from the metrics you've set to refine whatever you are doing and try to improve it for the next user or for the next project, basically. And that is it for trying to meet the needs of diverse learners. So I've added some resources here that you can at least look through, scan through to even begin that awareness journey when it comes to interacting with diverse people, when it comes to the issue of inclusion and accessibility. So you can explore this amazing tools and resources rather to learn more.